The fall of Alexandria. The sun hung low over the shimmering Mediterranean, casting a golden glow upon the white stone walls of Alexandria. The city, jewel of the ancient world, seemed to float between sea and sky, her lighthouse, Pharos, standing proud like a spear toward the heavens. Merchants shouted in Greek, Latin, and Egyptian, their voices mingling with the cries of gulls and the rhythm of the waves. The air smelled of salt, papyrus, and exotic spices from distant lands. To walk the streets of Alexandria was to walk through the veins of the known world. Scholars debated beneath marble colonnades. Philosophers strolled through gardens fragrant with myrrh and hibiscus. And at the heart of the city, like a brain within a skull, pulsed the great library, a treasure beyond measure. Scrolls from Greece, India, China, and Egypt were stacked in labyrinthine halls, each a whisper of human thought captured in ink and papyrus. It was said that if the library burned, the memory of mankind would dim. Among the library's young scribes was Dion, a boy of 17, whose ink-stained fingers and restless eyes reflected his obsession with stories. He had copied the works of Homer and traced the star maps of Egyptian astronomers. Every evening, he climbed to the library's highest balcony to watch the horizon, imagining the ships that came from lands he might never see. But on this day, the horizon carried more than trade and knowledge. It carried fire. The first rumors came from the docks. Roman banners, red as spilled blood, were sighted on the wind. Caesar himself had arrived, his war with Pompey dragging the storm of civil war into Egypt's glittering harbor. Soldiers marched through the streets, their armor clattering like falling coins, and tension spread like smoke. Inside the library, the scholars whispered. They would never harm the library, as said an old man with trembling hands. No conqueror dares to strangle the mind of the world. Dion wasn't so sure. He had copied enough histories to know that fire and ambition were twins. He slipped to the balcony, and for the first time, Alexandria felt small. Warships prowled the harbor like wolves circling a lamb. The night it began, the sky turned red. It started at the docks. Caesar, cornered by the Egyptian fleet and the forces of King Ptolemy XIII, set fire to the enemy ships to protect his own. But the wind betrayed the city. Flames leapt from mast to mast, and sparks rode the night air like demons. The fire reached the warehouses, then the scroll-filled depots near the library. Dion awoke to the sound of screams and the scent of burning papyrus. He ran barefoot through the marble hallways, his heart pounding as smoke coiled around the pillars. He found Callista, his mentor, kneeling beside a pile of scrolls, her eyes wet with despair. "Help me," she said, her voice breaking. "Take what you can." Together, they snatched what scrolls they could carry, stumbling through the chaos. Outside, the streets were a river of panic, women clutching children, men dragging baskets of valuables, and the crack of Roman steel echoing against the stone. The great Pharos still stood, its flame steady, but the city beneath it was unraveling into ash. Dion paused at the library's entrance, looking back one last time. The marble pillars glowed in the firelight, beautiful and doomed. The scrolls that could not be carried would be lost forever. He thought of the words, the dreams, the knowledge, all turning to smoke that curled into the heavens like a prayer no god would answer. Chapter 1. The Jewel of the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean sun rose like molten gold over the horizon, catching the white stones of Alexandria and making the city glow as if touched by divine hands. Even the sea seemed to bow to its splendor, waves whispering against the shore in soft applause. Alexandria, the city of Alexander's dream, the pride of the Ptolemies, stretched like a living tapestry of marble, color, and sound. From the harbor, the Pharos lighthouse pierced the morning mist, a colossal guardian of stone, its eternal flame guiding the world's sailors to safe haven. Beneath it, Ships from every corner of the known world rocked gently on the azure waters, Roman triremes, Arabian dhows, and the broad, painted vessels of Nubia and India. Sailors shouted in a dozen languages, their cries mingling with the shriek of gulls and the occasional lowing of cattle being led to market. Alexandria was not a city, it was a world condensed into streets and squares. The wide avenues, laid out in a perfect grid by the dreamers of old, buzzed with life. Greek philosophers in flowing robes debated under colonnades, their voices rising like sparrows in dispute. Egyptian priests in white linen carried offerings to the small shrines that dotted the side streets, the scent of incense trailing behind them. Vendors hawked everything from honeyed dates to glass amulets, and water sellers shook their bronze bells, calling the thirsty to drink. And in the very heart of this living organism stood the great library, the crown jewel of knowledge, as sacred as any temple in Egypt or Greece. To enter its vast halls was to step into a forest of wisdom, towering shelves and honeycombed walls filled with papyrus scrolls, each a captured whisper from the farthest edges of human thought. Greek tragedies and Egyptian hymns, Babylonian star charts and Indian mathematics, philosophy, medicine, and poetry, all gathered under one roof, as if the world itself had chosen to speak through ink. Among the library's many keepers was Dion, a young scribe whose fingers were perpetually stained with black ink and whose mind lived half in this world, half in the world of the scrolls he copied. His mornings began before dawn, crossing the marble courtyard as the fountain murmured under the first light. He would pass the carved statues of Homer, Aristotle, and Euclid, and feel the quiet weight of their eyes upon him, as though urging him to continue the eternal work of memory. For Dion, the library was not merely a place of work, it was a temple of dreams. He loved to climb to the upper balconies, where the warm sea breeze drifted through the open windows and the view stretched from the royal palaces to the bustling docks. From there, Alexandria looked immortal. He could see the royal quarter, with its gardens where rare flowers from India and Nubia bloomed, the palace of the Ptolemies, whose halls had once echoed with the footsteps of Cleopatra's ancestors, and the sprawling Canopic Way, the grand avenue where traders and nobles paraded in a riot of colours. Farther still, he could see the Jewish quarter, the Serapeum, and the workshops where artisans shaped glass as thin as a dragonfly's wings. But it was the harbour that always held Dion's gaze the longest. To him, it was a living map of the world, sails from Carthage, Spain, and even faraway Gaul, merchants from the Red Sea, bringing perfumes, ivory, and tales of lands beyond the desert. Each ship carried stories, and he dreamed that one day he would follow them, sailing east to see the silk markets of India, or west to hear the drums of unknown islands. Yet even as the city thrived, there was a whisper of unease. Dion had heard the gossip from sailors. Rome was restless. Caesar and Pompey had brought their war to Egypt's very doorstep, and King Ptolemy Xi's court was a nest of intrigue. To most citizens, this was distant thunder. Alexandria had survived conquerors before. But to the scholars of the library, whose lives were built on fragile scrolls and fragile peace, it was an omen. That evening, as the sun sank into the sea in a blaze of crimson, Dion sat with Callista, his mentor, on the library steps. She was a woman of 60, with silver hair braided neatly and eyes sharp as a falcon's. She handed him a scroll, an old one, its edges crumbling. "This," she said softly, "is a fragment of Herodotus. He called Egypt the gift of the Nile. And Alexandria, my boy, is the gift of all the world. But gifts are fragile things." Dion unrolled the scroll, tracing the faded ink with reverent fingers. "Do you think it could ever be lost?" he asked, the words tasting like fear. Callista's gaze drifted toward the sea, where the last light struck the Pharos, setting it ablaze with glory. "Every city falls, Dion. Even the brightest star burns out. But if we keep their words safe, perhaps a piece of them will live forever." He looked out at the city, alive with torches, music, and laughter. The streets glowed as though they would shine forever. Yet, in the pit of his stomach, Dion felt the faintest tremor of dread, like the softest breath before a storm. Chapter 2: The Night of Fire. The first scream tore through the streets long before the smoke rose. Dion was asleep in his tiny chamber in the library's west wing, dreaming of ships with crimson sails, when a distant boom shattered the night. He sat up, heart hammering, and the floor beneath him trembled. For a moment, he thought it was an earthquake. But then came the second boom, a deep, rolling thunder that did not come from the earth. Outside, horns blared. The unmistakable clash of steel echoed through the city. He rushed to the balcony, barefoot on the cold marble. The harbor was a vision of hell. Flames leapt from ship to ship, licking at the sails like hungry tongues. The fire spread with the wind, sending plumes of black smoke curling into the starlit sky. Roman war cries carried across the water, punctuated by the splintering of wood and the panicked shouts of sailors in every tongue. The Romans, a Dion whispered, his breath caught in his chest. They've set the ships ablaze. Down in the streets, the city erupted. People poured from their homes like startled birds, clutching children, valuables, anything they could carry. Dogs barked and donkeys brayed as merchants scrambled to save their goods. Above the chaos, the Pharos lighthouse still shone, its flame unshaken, but now it cast long, trembling shadows over a city in panic. Then Dion smelled it, the bitter, dry scent of burning papyrus. His stomach knotted. He spun and ran down the marble hallways, his footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. In the central hall of the library, he found Callista kneeling on the floor, her arms around a pile of scrolls. Her face was wet with sweat and soot, and the air was already thick with smoke. "They've fired the docks," as she said hoarsely. "The wind, gods help us, the wind is driving it toward us." Dion dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he picked up scrolls. "We have to save them." They worked in frantic silence, stuffing precious scrolls into baskets, hurling them toward the small stone cellar beneath the library, hoping the fire would not reach there. All around them, other scribes and scholars joined in the desperate rescue, their white robes soon smudged with ash. A sudden crash shook the floor. Somewhere outside, part of a warehouse roof had collapsed. The fire was moving faster than any of them had imagined. Through the arched windows, Dion could see the red glow crawling toward the library walls like a predator. Then the first embers drifted in on the wind. They were tiny, harmless-looking things, sparks that landed on marble and died, but each one was a messenger of doom. The library, for all its grandeur, was a temple of paper. If even a single spark found a scroll, the fire would spread like dry grass. "Dion!" Callista's voice snapped him from his trance. "The Eastern Storeroom, help me!" He followed her to the smaller annex of the library, where some of the oldest works were kept. The doors were heavy cedar, but smoke already slipped under them like a black snake. Dion pushed one open and coughed, eyes stinging. Inside, the room glowed orange. A burning beam had fallen through the roof from the building next door, and the fire was spreading along the wooden ceiling supports. "Help me with this chest!" Callista cried. Together, they dragged a heavy box filled with scrolls toward the door, their muscles screaming. They stumbled out into the courtyard as another beam crashed behind them, sparks exploding in a deadly rain. The city beyond the library was unrecognizable. Columns cast flickering shadows across streets choked with smoke. Citizens ran in every direction, some carrying goods, others simply fleeing with empty hands. Soldiers, Roman and Egyptian alike, shoved through the crowd, some trying to restore order, others looting in the confusion. Somewhere nearby, a horse screamed, a long, terrible sound that seemed to echo forever. Dion and Callista worked until their bodies trembled, saving what they could. But the library was too vast, the fire too merciless. Flames licked at the windows, and a low, hungry roar filled the air, as if the city itself had become a living furnace. Finally, Callista seized Dion's shoulder, her face streaked with soot and tears. "No more," she said, her voice raw. "We must live to remember." He hesitated, looking back at the marble halls that had been his entire world. The library glowed in the firelight, eerily beautiful, like a phoenix in its final moment. He thought of all the stories, the knowledge, the lives captured in ink, turning to smoke that would drift over the Mediterranean and vanish into the night. With a breaking heart, Dion followed her into the streets, leaving the library behind as the fire consumed it. As dawn crept over the horizon, Alexandria was a city of ghosts. Smoke hung over the streets like a funeral shroud. The harbor was a graveyard of charred ships, their blackened masts jutting toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The great library was silent. Chapter 3: Ashes and Memory. The morning after the fire, Alexandria awoke to silence. Not the soft, peaceful quiet of dawn, but the hollow hush that follows catastrophe, the absence of music, of laughter, of the ordinary clamor of life. The streets were grey with ash. Smoke rose in lazy columns from the skeletons of buildings, drifting toward the pale sky. Even the gulls were gone, driven from the harbor by the stench of charred wood and death. Dion stumbled through the city like a shadow. His once white tunic was blackened with soot, his eyes red from smoke and sleeplessness. Around him, the survivors of the night moved as if in a dream. Some carried buckets of water to douse the last embers, others knelt in the ruins of their homes, picking through the rubble for anything unburned. The harbor, once the pride of the Mediterranean, was a cemetery of ships. Blackened hulls leaned against one another like toppled dominoes, and the water was slick with oil and debris. Here and there, a Roman soldier stood watch, his armor glinting coldly in the morning light. But Dion's feet carried him, almost without thought, back to the library. What had once been the greatest repository of human knowledge now stood in ruin. The marble columns were scorched, the wooden doors gone, the roof partially collapsed. Inside, the smell of burned papyrus was everywhere, sharp and bitter, clinging to the air like grief itself. He stepped over blackened beams and piles of ash that had once been scrolls from India, Babylon, Greece, and Egypt, centuries of thought, all reduced to dust in a single night. His sandals crunched softly over what had been poetry, maps, medicine, and dreams. In the far corner, under a half-collapsed wall, he found Callista. She was kneeling, her hands sifting gently through the ashes as though she could conjure the scrolls back into being. Her silver hair was streaked with soot, her eyes hollow. "We saved some," Dion whispered, his voice breaking. She nodded without looking up. "Yes. A few. But so much is gone." For a long time, they sat in silence amid the ruins, the weight of history pressing down on them. Dion thought of Homer's words, of the Egyptian hymns to the Nile, of the mathematics that charted the stars, all vanishing in the span of a single night. He wondered if the world would ever know what it had lost, or if the absence would simply settle into history like a missing tooth in a long-forgotten skull. In the days that followed, Alexandria staggered to its feet. The Romans took control, their banners unfurling above the royal quarter. Caesar himself walked the streets, flanked by soldiers, his face carved from stone. He had won his battle, but to Dion and the people of the city, victory was a word with no meaning in the face of such loss. Funeral pyres burned for the dead. Merchants rebuilt their stalls in the canopic way. Life, as it always does, tried to resume, but a hollowness lingered, a wound beneath the city's shining skin. For Dion, the library's death was a personal exile. He spent his days in the small cellar where the rescued scrolls were stored, cataloguing them with Callister. Each scroll felt like a survivor pulled from the sea, fragile and precious. They worked tirelessly, trying to salvage memory from oblivion. One evening, as the sun bled into the sea, Dion climbed the steps of the ruined library. He stood where the great bronze doors had once been, looking out over the city. Alexandria was still beautiful, but it was a different beauty now, scarred, muted, aware of its own mortality. Callister joined him, her hands clasped behind her back. "Do you know what I told myself last night?" she said softly. "I told myself that fire cannot truly destroy words. Not all of them. As long as even a single scribe remembers, the library lives on in us." Dion closed his eyes. He thought of the scrolls he had copied, of the stories he had read so many times that they were etched into his memory like carvings in stone. He could recite them, teach them, carry them forward. Perhaps that was how the library would survive, not in marble halls or cedar shelves, but in living minds, passed from voice to voice, generation to generation. He opened his eyes and looked toward the Pharos, still standing tall at the edge of the harbor. Its flame burned steadily against the evening sky, unshaken by the city's tragedy. "Then I will remember," he whispered. "I will keep the fire alive." Years later, travelers would come to Alexandria and speak of the night the library burned, of the ashes that rose into the sky like ghosts of wisdom, and of the boy who survived to tell its stories. The city would rise again, for cities always do. But for those who had walked through fire, the memory would never leave, the night when knowledge itself seemed mortal, and the world learned how fragile its brightest treasures could be. Chapter 4. The Seeds of Rebirth. Thus it was, in the twilight of the great age of the Ptolemies and the rise of Roman dominion, that Alexandria, queen of the Nile Delta and light of the ancient world, came to know sorrow as deep as the sea itself. Its harbor, once alive with sails from every horizon, now lay beneath a haze of smoke. Its proud streets, where philosophers debated and merchants bargained in a dozen tongues, carried only the soft echo of footsteps through ash. The great library, the pride of kings and scholars alike, had fallen to flame. None could say whether the fire was born of negligence, accident, or the cruelty of war, for history records many causes. Some blamed Julius Caesar's siege, others later conflicts, but the truth mattered little to those who watched centuries of wisdom vanish in a single night. When dawn rose after that dreadful night, the Brutian quarter was silent. Marble columns, blackened at their tops, stood like mourners in a field of ruin. Papyrus fragments drifted along the canopic way like pale leaves in a windless autumn. And the people of Alexandria, who had once carried themselves with the pride of inheritors of both Greek and Egyptian glory, moved as if in mourning for a beloved who would not return. Among these survivors was Dion, a young scribe of modest origin, who in later years would be remembered only in fragments of letters and a single surviving chronicle. He had been one of the keepers of words, assigned to the library's lower halls, where he spent his youth copying texts from worn papyrus to new. When the fire came, Dion had run toward the smoke, not away from it. He and a few others, whose names are now mostly lost, dragged armfuls of scrolls into the stone cellars beneath the scholars' district. Their hands bled from splinters and flame, and the smoke burned their throats, but still they carried what they could, knowing that once a word has gone to fire, it cannot be spoken again. By the time the inferno consumed the last upper chambers, the rescuers had saved only a fraction of the treasures of the library, but to them it was the difference between oblivion and memory. For weeks after, Dion wandered through a city that seemed to breathe grief. The market stalls stood abandoned, their canopies torn and stained by soot. The temple of Serapis, once filled with music and offerings, now opened its doors to only a few faithful who lit lamps for the gods and for the souls of the lost. By the harbor, fishermen mended their nets in silence, and the waters reflected the grey of the sky as if the sun itself mourned. In those days, a traveller to Alexandria might have thought the city was a corpse, its life snuffed out with the last of the smoke. But the chroniclers remind us that cities, like men, have souls that endure beyond the breaking of the body. And in the quiet shadows, the first seeds of rebirth were being sown. Dion's path to renewal began in the underground cellars, where the rescued scrolls lay in careful piles. Their edges were blackened, and some were brittle to the touch, but they still held the voices of the ancients: Homer, Euclid, Herodotus, the lores of Egypt, the songs of the Nile priests, and maps that charted the stars. There he met Callister, a silver-haired matron, once a teacher of rhetoric to noble sons. Her home had burned, her pupils scattered, but she had refused to leave the city, saying that a city dies only when its last witness abandons it to memory alone. She found Dion hunched over a rescued scroll, his fingers stained with soot, his face lit by the trembling light of a single oil lamp. "Why do you write?" she asked him softly, "when all can burn again?" Dion looked up, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and stubbornness. "Because memory dies only when no one speaks it. If I copy a scroll and hide it, perhaps 100 years hence, a voice will rise again from these ashes." Callister placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let us plant seeds of words together." So it was that a silent brotherhood of scribes formed in the ruins of Alexandria. By day, they walked among the wounded streets, helping neighbors rebuild walls and mend lives. By night, they descended into the lamplit vaults, where the last whispers of the library waited to be reborn. Each copied scroll became a prayer against forgetting. Each salvaged phrase of Plato or Hesiod or the sacred hymns of Egypt was like a reed sprouting by the Nile after flood, fragile yet insistent. As the seasons turned, the city itself began to stir back to life. Traders from Cyrene and Anch returned to the harbour, their ships cautious but willing to test the strength of Alexandria's resilience. Fishermen sang again as they cast their nets, and children played among the charred columns, unafraid of the shadows of history. One evening, Dion climbed to the top of the Pharos lighthouse, its eternal flame a symbol of endurance. From that height, he beheld his city as the sun set in a blaze of copper and crimson. The scars of fire were still visible, but so too were signs of renewal: smoke from cooking fires, market canopies in bright dye, the green of fig trees sprouting in courtyards, and sails like white wings gliding into the harbour. Callister joined him at the summit. Her hair whipped in the sea wind. "What do you see, Dion?" "A city of ashes," he said, then paused, "and a city of beginnings." She nodded. "The city that rises after fire is never the same as the one that fell. It remembers." Their quiet labour continued for years. Some scrolls were carried in secret to distant monasteries and libraries, hidden in walls and chests. Some were copied into Greek and Latin, ensuring that even if Alexandria fell again, the echo of its knowledge would travel with the winds of trade and conquest. Thus the chroniclers teach us, no fire can wholly consume a city whose people choose to remember. Stones may fall, scrolls may burn, but memory carried in the hearts of the faithful endures beyond the reach of flame. And so, long after the world forgot the exact year of the library's burning, Alexandria lived again. Not as the city of marble and gold it once was, but as a city of memory, resilience, and seeds that would one day bloom across the world, in the libraries of Rome, in the monasteries of Byzantium, in the whispers of scholars who never knew the Nile, but who owed their learning to the hands of a young scribe and a silver-haired teacher who refused to let the light die. Chapter 5. The Final Transformation. In the centuries after the first fire dimmed the light of the great library, Alexandria did not die, yet it did not remain the same. Cities, like the rivers that feed them, changed their course with time. Marble cracks, dynasties fade, and the songs that echo through the streets take on new tongues. And so it was that Alexandria, queen of the Nile Delta, entered an age of transformation, where glory gave way to survival, and survival to legend. The first great change came with the Romans, whose eagle standards cast long shadows over the Mediterranean. To them, Alexandria was a jewel to guard, for its grain fed the empire and its harbour commanded the sea routes of the east. Roman garrisons patrolled the Canopic Way, their armour glinting in the Egyptian sun, and Latin joined Greek and Coptic as the voices of power. But Rome, for all its might, did not bring the city peace of the soul. The brilliance of the Ptolemaic age, with its scholars, philosophers, and engineers, faded into memory, and Alexandria became a city of commerce rather than curiosity. The surviving scrolls, copied in the shadows after the fire, lay hidden in cellars and distant estates, their guardians old or dying. It was during these years that Dion, the humble scribe of the rebirth, grew into an old man. His hands trembled when he held a reed pen, yet his heart remained firm. He would walk along the harbour, watching Roman galleys take on grain bound for the Tiber, and murmur to the wind. They see a port, a market, a prize. But I see a ghost of the city that was. In time, Dion passed into memory, and with him went the last direct witness to the secret labour of preservation. His scrolls, those seeds of rebirth, were scattered like pollen on the wind. Some travelled to Rome, some to Anch, some vanished entirely, leaving only whispers in the margins of later chronicles. The second great transformation came not with soldiers but with faith. As the Roman world bent slowly toward Christianity, Alexandria became a battleground of belief. Once, the city had welcomed all gods. In the same streets, one might see Greek philosophers debating under porticos, Egyptian priests bearing offerings to Isis, and Jewish scholars walking to the great synagogue. Tolerance was Alexandria's secret wealth, for in its diversity it found both trade and knowledge. But faith, when it seeks sole dominion, is a sharper blade than steel. Christian preachers came first in whispers, then in shouts, proclaiming the end of idols. Some of the city rejoiced, weary of the old gods. Others clung to the temple of Serapis, last refuge of the ancient world. Chroniclers tell of a day when the Serapeum, guardian temple of knowledge and faith, fell to the wrath of zealots. Statues were toppled, scrolls and sacred objects cast into the streets. The sound of breaking stone echoed like thunder, and for the second time in living memory, Alexandria wept for its vanishing past. It is said that in those days, a young monk named Stephanos walked the ruins and found a fragment of Euclid, a single sheet of geometry blackened by age. He held it to his chest and whispered, "Even in a world remade, the stars and their measures remain." This was Alexandria now, a city court between heaven and earth, between memory and transformation. A final transformation came with the Arab conquest in the 7th century, when the banners of the new faith rose above the harbour. To the soldiers of the desert, Alexandria was a strange jewel, its streets wide, its harbour filled with ships, its pharos still shining like a second sun. But time had already hollowed the city. The old library was long gone, the temples of the Greeks and Egyptians silent, and much of the learning of the ancients dispersed across the world. The conquerors took the city, and with them came a new language, a new rhythm of life. Arabic joined the chorus of history, and the final echo of the old Alexandria slipped into legend. The people now spoke of the city not as a living beacon, but as a tale to be told, a city that once touched the stars with its wisdom, now walking the earth as a shadow of itself. Yet, the chroniclers remind us, nothing of greatness vanishes entirely. In the libraries of Damascus, Baghdad, and later Cordoba, the knowledge of Alexandria bloomed anew, carried in fragments, translations, and memories. The city's body changed, but its soul migrated, traveling the world like a wandering light. And so, the Alexandria that survived was no longer the Alexandria that was. Its streets filled with new prayers, its markets hummed in new tongues, and its pharos stood as a lonely sentinel, watching centuries pass like ships in the night. The city had been Greek, Roman, Christian, and now Arab. It had been a beacon, a battlefield, a market, and a memory. This was the final transformation. From glory to survival. From memory to myth. From a city of the world to a city of time. Those who walk the streets today might still feel it, a whisper in the wind off the harbour, a hint of ink and smoke, a memory of laughter under marble colonnades, and the faintest sound of pages turning in a library that no longer stands. For Alexandria, though changed beyond recognition, never truly died. It lives in every book that traces its lineage to the words once saved by trembling hands, and in every mind that dreams of a city where the world once gathered to learn. Chapter 6: The Legacy of Alexandria. Long after the streets of Alexandria fell silent, after the pharos crumbled into the sea and the marble colonnades weathered into dust, the city's true legacy walked the world unseen. For a city of knowledge does not end with the fall of its stones. It lives wherever the words it birthed take root. The great library, whose ashes had drifted across the Nile Delta like mourning veils, left behind no building and no complete archive. Yet, its spirit travelled in fragments, in scrolls smuggled to private collections, in copies sent to Rome, in papyrus bundles carried east by traders and scholars. What had once been a single beacon of learning now became a constellation scattered across the world. The Byzantine custodians. After Alexandria's final transformation under Arab rule, its older knowledge had already migrated northward, finding shelter in the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, the new Rome, became a keeper of fragments. From the late antiquity into the early Middle Ages, Byzantine scholars maintained and copied Greek texts on mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. The works of Euclid, who had once walked Alexandria's streets, became the foundation of geometry in the East and West. Ptolemy's Almagest, the great astronomical treatise, guided stargazers for over a millennium, reaching from the palace libraries of Constantinople to distant observatories in Persia. Galen's medical writings, refined in Alexandria's hospitals and dissection rooms, influenced physicians from the Mediterranean to the Abbasid court. Yet, Byzantium was a vault, not a forge. It guarded, but seldom expanded the knowledge it inherited. The flame of discovery that had burned in Alexandria's lecture halls flickered low, until it found new air in the deserts of Arabia. 2. The Arab Golden Age. When the armies of Islam swept across Egypt in the 7th century, they found a city that was already a ghost of its former self. But the spirit of knowledge, that restless inheritance of Alexandria, migrated into the heart of the Arab world. By the 8th and 9th centuries, the Abbasid Caliphate, with its capital in Baghdad, became the new Alexandria in all but name. In the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, scholars translated Greek, Coptic, and Syriac texts into Arabic. Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and Al-Hazan, Ibn al-Haytham, drew heavily on Alexandrian learning, transforming fragments into new discoveries. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy flourished, bridging antiquity to the medieval world. It was here that Euclid's Elements and Ptolemy's star charts were copied, studied, and refined, later traveling along trade and crusader routes back to Europe. In these centuries, Alexandria lived under another name, its seedlings flowering in desert soil. 3. The long journey to Europe. From Baghdad and Damascus, knowledge traveled westward through Andalusia, Islamic Spain, where Toledo and Cordoba became centers of translation and scholarship. In the 12th century, European scholars such as Gerard of Cremona translated Arabic and Greek texts into Latin, many of which traced their lineage to Alexandria. Medical schools in Salerno and Montpellier began to teach from the texts of Galen and Hippocrates, preserved through Arab intermediaries. The works of Aristotle and Plato, preserved and commented upon, ignited the scholastic movement, laying the intellectual groundwork for the Renaissance. Thus, the long arc of Alexandria's legacy reached across 1,000 years. A scroll copied in Dion's trembling hand could, by some miracle of history, inform a scholar in Paris or Florence. Though the city of marble had fallen, its ideas built cathedrals of thought that spanned continents. 4. The Renaissance and the Whisper of Alexandria. By the 15th and 16th centuries, the Renaissance blossomed in Europe. Humanists celebrated the rebirth of classical knowledge, yet many did not know that the light they followed had once burned on the Nile. When printing presses multiplied books across Europe, the chain of preservation that had begun with Alexandrian scribes finally bore its richest fruit. Euclid's geometry, Galen's medicine, and Ptolemy's maps became foundations for modern science and exploration. Even the Age of Discovery, which sent European sails around Africa and across the Atlantic, owed something to Alexandria's distant whispers, for it was knowledge of the heavens and the earth, refined through centuries of preservation, that guided ships across unknown seas. V. The eternal legacy. And so, history teaches this. A city may fall in stone, but rise in thought. A library may burn, but its memory can walk the world. Alexandria's final and truest legacy was not in the columns that fell or the harbour that silted, but in the continuity of human curiosity it nurtured. Even today, when archaeologists dive into the harbour and find statues of pharaohs and Greek kings, or when scholars trace footnotes from Aristotle to Alhazen to Newton, they touch the ghost of Alexandria. Its lesson to the world remains unchanged through the centuries. Knowledge is the only empire that endures, and those who preserve it, even in the smallest fragments, plant seeds that will flower long after the walls have crumbled. Chapter 7. The Rediscovery. Time is the greatest conqueror. It buries marble under silt, temples under sand, and memories under centuries. Yet, Alexandria's story was never truly lost, only sleeping beneath the waves and stones, waiting for the patient hands of modern seekers to awaken it once more. For more than 1,000 years, travelers came to Egypt and walked the modern streets of Alexandria, seeing little to remind them of the city that had once ruled the seas. Napoleon scholars in the 18th century, gazing at its modest Ottoman walls, could hardly imagine that this sleepy port had once been the lighthouse of the ancient world. The call of the past. The rediscovery of Alexandria began with questions whispered through history. Where had the pharaohs stood? What remained of the great library? Could the lost city be found beneath modern life? In the 19th century, European scholars and travelers followed the call of classical texts. They read Strabo, Plutarch, and the Arab chroniclers, tracing the ghosts of the ancient city through maps and ruins. Yet much of Ptolemaic and Roman Alexandria remained hidden, submerged by earthquakes, claimed by the sea, or built over by generations of new life. A French traveller, Émile Priest d'Avesnes, once stood on the shoreline and said, "Alexandria is a palimpsest. To find the city of the Ptolemies, one must peel back the pages of time." 2. The city beneath the sea. The true awakening came in the late 20th century, when underwater archaeology revealed a sunken city. Earthquakes in the 4th and 8th centuries had shattered the royal quarters, sending palaces, columns, and statues tumbling into the harbour. For centuries, fishermen and sailors glimpsed the tops of columns under clear water, thinking them rocks or reefs. Then came Frank Gaudiot, the French marine archaeologist, in the 1990s. With sonar scans, divers, and patient surveys, his team mapped the ancient harbour. What they found stunned the world. Giant statues of pharaohs and Ptolemaic rulers, lying sideways in the sand like sleeping titans. Sphinxes and obelisks, once proud in palace courtyards, now home to fish and coral. Stone blocks of the royal harbour, showing the exact outline of Cleopatra's palace and temples to Isis and Osiris. The sea had claimed the city, but in doing so, it had preserved it, a time capsule beneath the waves, untouched by centuries of urban growth. Divers described a dreamlike scene, swimming past columns and sphinxes, touching hieroglyphs last seen by ancient hands, and feeling the city's pulse through the currents. 3. Whispers from the sand. While the sea guarded one part of the city, the sands of Egypt guarded another. Excavations in El Dikr revealed a Roman amphitheatre, baths, and mosaic floors, proving that Alexandria was a city of entertainment and learning deep into the Roman era. Nearby, necropolises gave up their secrets, painted tombs and sarcophagi, the silent citizens of the forgotten city. Even in modern construction projects, history spoke. In 2017, workers digging for new buildings uncovered a massive black granite sarcophagus, buried for more than 2,000 years. Though it held no royal treasure, it rekindled the sense of awe. Beneath every stone, a fragment of Alexandria waits to be heard. 4. The legacy reclaimed. Today, Alexandria's rediscovery is a global effort. Museums, universities, and archaeologists piece together the fragments, seeking to reconstruct the ancient city in both scholarship and imagination. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina, opened in 2002, stands as a modern tribute to the Great Library. Its circular architecture evokes the sun rising over the sea, while its walls bear scripts from all known languages, declaring that Alexandria's spirit of learning lives again. Digital reconstructions and 3D models now allow the world to walk through ancient streets, to see the pharos shining again, and to imagine the scholars and merchants of long ago. In classrooms and documentaries, Alexandria is no longer a cautionary tale of loss, but a story of endurance and rebirth. A city beyond time. As divers emerge from the harbour with photographs of sphinxes in the green light of the sea, as tourists walk the marble steps of El Dikr, a profound truth becomes clear. Alexandria never belonged to one era. It is a city of time itself. It was Greek and Egyptian, Roman and Christian, Arab and global. Its body may have fallen to fire, faith, and flood, but its soul walked the centuries and returned home in the hands of those who sought it. The rediscovery of Alexandria is not merely an archaeological triumph. It is a human triumph, proof that curiosity can overcome oblivion, that memory can survive the tides of time, and that every lost city waits for the day when it will speak again. In the end, Alexandria's voice reaches across millennia, whispering to all who seek knowledge. Do not fear the fall of empires, for wisdom walks beyond stone. Build libraries, share learning, and your city will live forever. Chapter 8. The Eternal City of the Mind. In the long arc of human history, cities rise and fall like the tides of the sea. Walls crumble, empires vanish, and generations walk past the ruins, often forgetting the dreams of those who came before. Yet some cities never truly die. They become eternal not in stone, but in the mind of humanity. Alexandria is one such city. The Fall Revisited. When we remember the fires of Alexandria, we imagine scrolls turning to ash, the pharos dimming, and streets echoing with silence. Its fall was not a single event, but a slow unraveling. First, the library's earliest loss under Caesar's siege, when the flames of war licked the scrolls of wisdom. Then, the Christian purges, when the city's pagan temples and shrines were emptied or destroyed, and Hypatia, last great daughter of the Museion, fell to a mob's rage. Finally, the conquest of new empires, which shifted trade routes and attention away, leaving Alexandria a shadow of itself. To the ancients, it seemed as though the world had let its greatest light go dark. But the truth revealed by history is this: Alexandria never left us. It simply moved from the harbour to the horizon of human thought, where no flame could touch it. 2. The city carried in memory. A city can be rebuilt in stone, but its soul is carried by those who remember it. Scholars fleeing the fires carried scrolls to Byzantium. Traveling merchants brought fragments to Damascus and Baghdad. Translation houses in Toledo and Palermo turned Alexandrian knowledge into Latin. Renaissance thinkers walked on the paths first paved in the museum's lecture halls. Every copy of Euclid, every diagram of Ptolemy, every surgical note by Galen was a living brick in the invisible city of Alexandria. Through memory and transmission, Alexandria became a city of the mind. A library without walls. A harbor that no storm could sink. 3. Alexandria in the modern imagination. Today, we walk in a world that owes silent debts to Alexandria. Satellites orbiting the Earth trace paths that descend from Ptolemaic astronomy. Surgical techniques and medical terminology still echo Galen's lectures. Philosophy, mathematics, and engineering carry the DNA of Greek and Egyptian fusion, first nurtured in the City of Light. Modern Alexandria reaches beyond geography. It exists in every university, every digital library, and every laboratory where the pursuit of knowledge continues. When we type words into a search engine, we participate in a dream born in the Great Library. The belief that knowledge can be gathered, shared, and used to understand the cosmos. 4. The lessons of the eternal city. The story of Alexandria carries lessons for all ages. Knowledge is fragile if hoarded, but eternal if shared. The scrolls burned, but the ideas survived, because someone copied them, taught them, and passed them on. Intolerance is the greatest fire. The city fell not just to war and earthquake, but to fear of new ideas, to violence against curiosity. True cities are built in minds, not in marble. Empires vanish, Rome, Carthage, Babylon. But Alexandria's library lives on in every book and bite. V. A walk through the timeless harbor. Imagine, now, that we walk once more along Alexandria's ancient harbor. Not in the dust of history, but in the eternal plain of memory. The Pharos still shines. Triremes and Roman galleys glide across the glittering water. Scholars in white and ochre robes debate on the marble steps. Hypatia raises her hand to the stars, teaching that truth is the only compass humanity ever needs. This city cannot burn, because it lives in us. It is rebuilt whenever someone seeks wisdom without fear. 6. The final reflection. Alexandria Saga, from glorious rise to tragic fall, to rediscovery and immortal legacy, is our saga. For every person who writes a book, every teacher who explains the stars, every student who learns not to fear questions, is a citizen of Alexandria. The city may lie fragmented beneath sea and sand, but in the grand library of the human mind, its lanterns are still lit. And if one lesson endures above all, it is this: empires fade, marble cracks, knowledge, shared, makes us eternal. Chapter 9. Echoes through eternity. Time is not a straight road, but a circle of echoes. Cities fall, but their names ripple through generations, carried in songs, books, and whispered legends. And of all the echoes of antiquity, Alexandria's voice is among the clearest and most enduring. Even after the fires cooled and the harbors silted over, the memory of Alexandria became a mirror in which each new age saw its own reflection. The medieval whisper. After its classical age ended, Alexandria lived on as legend in the medieval mind. Arab scholars in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad revered the city as a place of great learning, often imagining the library as an ocean of knowledge. Travelers like Ibn Battuta described its harbor and lighthouses, sensing ghosts of the past in the sea breeze. In medieval Europe, monks and scholars copied fragments of works born in Alexandria, often without knowing their origin. In legends and chronicles, the Pharos became a mythic beacon. Some said it had magic mirrors to spot ships from miles away. Others believed it contained secrets of the stars. Thus, even as stone and scroll turned to dust, Alexandria became a story. And stories are the strongest ships across the sea of time. 2. The Renaissance and the rebirth of light. When Europe stirred from the long medieval night, the echo of Alexandria became a call to rediscovery. Italian humanists searched for Greek and Arabic manuscripts, often carrying the intellectual DNA of the Museion. Copernicus and Galileo read works inspired by Alexandrian astronomy. Da Vinci and medical pioneers traced lines that began in the dissecting rooms of Herophilos and Galen. The Renaissance was, in many ways, Alexandria reborn in spirit. Florence, Venice, and Paris became new harbors of knowledge, each dreaming to restore the lost light of the great library. Artists painted scholars among columns. Philosophers imagined cities of learning. And explorers sailed with the ambition that Alexandria once lit in men's hearts. 3. The Age of Empires and the Shadow of the Past. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as European empires spread across seas and deserts, Alexandria rose again in curiosity. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt, 1798, brought scholars and artists who sought the ghost of the ancient city. The Description der Egypt, a monumental study, included drawings of ruins and speculations on the lost harbour, rekindling the city's legend in Europe. Romantic poets like Shelley and Byron evoked the fallen lighthouse and the forgotten queens, turning Alexandria into a symbol of glory and fragility. By the Victorian era, travellers spoke of walking through a palimpsest. Ottoman streets above Mamluk ruins, Mamluk streets above Roman stones, and all of it whispering Ptolemaic dreams. 4. Alexandria in the Age of Discovery and Science. The 19th and 20th centuries gave the echoes of Alexandria a scientific voice. Archaeologists and linguists, inspired by the Rosetta Stone, which itself emerged from the soil of Egypt, unlocked hieroglyphs and rebuilt fragments of Alexandrian thought. Oceanographers and divers discovered the sunken palace of Cleopatra, turning legends into maps and measurements. Museums from Cairo to London, Paris to New York displayed columns, coins, and mosaics, each a silent ambassador of Alexandria. The city echoed in technology, too. When the Suez Canal opened in 1869, Alexandria became again a global harbour. Its name tied once more to commerce, curiosity, and the meeting of continents. V. Alexandria in the digital age. In the 21st century, the echo of Alexandria has taken on a new form, one the ancient scholars could only dream of. Digital archives and online libraries fulfill the dream of the Museion. Every scroll, every book, every idea, instantly shared across the globe. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina, completed in 2002, rises like a modern sun disk on the Mediterranean shore, a promise that the echo of learning will never fade again. Through fiber optics and satellites, Alexandria has returned as a city of light. Its lanterns now made of data. Its harbour now the boundless ocean of the internet. Every scientist searching for truth. Every student downloading a paper. Every teacher spreading knowledge is walking in the echo of the great library. 6. The immortal pulse. Standing today on the Corniche, watching waves strike the stones. One can hear the city's heart if one listens closely. The sea recites the names of Ptolemies and Caesars. The wind carries the voices of Hypatia and Callimachus. The sunlight glints where the Pharos once stood, reminding the world that light never truly dies. Alexandria's pulse is not in her ruins. but in the curiosity she planted in the human spirit. It beats in universities, libraries, labs, and studios. In every place where someone says, "I want to understand." 7. The final echo. The echo of Alexandria does not fade. It travels forward into tomorrow, reminding humanity of a simple, eternal truth. Wisdom is the only empire that can never fall. As long as we seek, we question, we learn. Alexandria lives. In memory, in discovery, in every shared spark of knowledge. Chapter 10. The Final Lament of the Sea. The Mediterranean winds swept across the empty harbor, carrying with them the salt of old stories. Where once triremes and merchant ships crowded the waters, there were now only fishermen's boats, their sails like ghosts of the fleets that had ruled the sea. Alexandria, the jewel of empires, stood half-buried in sand and memory. But the sea remembered. The sea does not forget. A city of shadows. By the time the last echo of empire faded, the once great streets were filled with shadows and whispers. Marble colonnades lay cracked and sunken. The Pharos, the eye of the ancient world, had fallen stone by stone into the waves after centuries of storms and neglect. Travelers spoke of walking through two cities at once. The living Alexandria, where markets and mosques hummed quietly. And the ghost Alexandria, where every wall, every ruin, whispered what it once had been. In the silence of night, when the wind brushed the harbor, some swore they could hear the steps of philosophers and the scratching of scribes in the library that was no more. 2. The last keeper of memories. Among those who still walked the old streets was Nicholas, a scholar descended from generations of librarians and teachers, whose family had once tended the scrolls of the Museion. Though the library was gone, and emperors no longer sent ships filled with knowledge, he kept a small collection of manuscripts in a hidden stone chamber, deep below the ruins of a temple long abandoned. By the light of a single oil lamp, he would unroll parchments, running his fingers over words older than memory. Plays of Euripides, charts of the stars by Hipparchus, medical notes on the pulse and blood from the hands of Galen. Each night, he would read aloud to the empty room, as if the ghosts of the library still gathered to listen. "You are not forgotten," he whispered to the echoes of the past. "As long as one man remembers, the city lives." 3. The sea as witness. Beyond the harbor walls, the Mediterranean murmured its own lament. The sea had watched it all. The arrival of Ptolemy I, founding his city of light. The glory of the great library. The march of Romans. The fires and riots. And finally, silence. When storms rolled in, the waves crashed against the drowned stones of the Pharos, singing like 1,000 voices of the past. Fishermen told tales to their children. On certain moonlit nights, if you sailed past the harbor mouth, you could see lights beneath the water, as if the Pharos still burned in the depths, refusing to let go of the world it once guided. 4. A visitor from distant shores. One spring morning, as Nicholas walked the quiet docks, a ship from Venice arrived, its sails white as gulls. The captain, a merchant named Lorenzo, stepped ashore not for trade, but for curiosity. He had heard rumors of the old city, of sunken palaces and ruins that could teach the West forgotten secrets. When he met Nicholas, he was astonished that the old scholar spoke fluent Greek, Latin, and Arabic, bridging centuries of empires in his voice. Together, they walked the ruins, the Serapeum, where stone steps led to nowhere, the broken columns of the Caesareum, The silent harbour, where Cleopatra once watched the horizon for Antony's sails. It is as if I am walking inside a memory. Lorenzo whispered, his boots kicking up centuries of dust. The gift of the past. On the final night before Lorenzo's departure, Niccolòs led him to the hidden chamber beneath the old temple. He unwrapped the last surviving scrolls, their edges cracked and yellow, and placed them in the merchant's hands. "Take them," he said softly. "The city is dying, but knowledge must live. Let Alexandria sail with you." Lorenzo, humbled and trembling, swore that the scrolls would be copied and protected. In that moment, Alexandria's heart beat once more, for its true walls were built not of stone, but of ideas. 6. The final lament. As the ship left the harbour, Niccolòs stood on the shore, his robe catching the sea wind, watching the sun rise over a city that had outlived itself. The Mediterranean whispered, lapping against the sunken blocks of the Pharos. "I have seen you rise. I have seen you fall. And I will carry your name to every shore I touch." Far below, in the green-blue depths, fish swam through palace halls, and coral grew where scholars once debated the stars. Alexandria was gone, and yet alive everywhere. Her final lament was not a cry of loss, but a song of immortality. As long as knowledge sails, Alexandria will never drown. Chapter 11. The Scrolls of the Eternal City. The ship from Alexandria cut across the Mediterranean waters, its sails swollen by the spring wind. In the captain's cabin, wrapped in linen and oilcloth, lay the last whispers of the great library. Scrolls that had survived fire, conquest, and centuries of silence. They were small in number now, but weightless with the burden of memory. Words from Homer and Euripides, notes of Hipparchus tracing the heavens, and a fragment of Herophilos, describing the mysteries of the human body. The voyage of knowledge. Lorenzo, the Venetian merchant, stood at the stern of his ship, watching Alexandria fade into a thin line on the horizon. He felt as though he carried the soul of a fallen city. Storms lashed the ship near Crete, as if Poseidon himself tested the worth of the knowledge he bore. Corsairs chased them off the coast of Cyprus, lured by the promise of gold, unaware that the true treasure was words, not coin. Through rain and night, Lorenzo swore silently to Niccolòs and to history. These scrolls will not die at sea. Alexandria will breathe again. 2. Arrival in Venice. When the ship glided into the Venetian lagoon, the city of canals and bells greeted it with sunlit waters and gulls crying overhead. Venice, in the 15th century, was hungry for knowledge. Its printers and humanists scoured the East for manuscripts, feeding the Renaissance fire that had already begun in Florence. Lorenzo walked the scrolls through labyrinthine alleys, across stone bridges, and into the palazzo of the scholar Pietro Bembo, a man whose library rivaled monasteries. When the linen was unwrapped, the old scholar trembled. By the saints, these are Alexandrian hands. This is the blood of the ancient world. 3. The rebirth of words. Weeks turned to months, as scribes carefully copied every letter, the cracking papyrus reborn in ink on crisp paper. The astronomical charts inspired Italian mathematicians, whispering to Copernicus and Galileo across time. Herophilos' anatomy rekindled debates in Padua, guiding the first dissections of the Renaissance. Fragments of poetry stirred the hearts of men who would later write sonnets. and operas filled with the ghosts of ancient voices. The scrolls of Alexandria became books, and books became wings, carrying the city's long-silenced song to Florence, Paris, and Oxford. 4. The silent architect of the Renaissance. Though no one in the piazzas of Europe spoke Niccolò's name, his act of quiet preservation was the invisible foundation of a new age. The Renaissance was built not only by painters and princes, but also by ghosts from Alexandria, by the ink of a city that refused to vanish. In the studios of Florence, artists painted men under domes of stars, mirroring the ceilings of the Museion long gone. In the courtyards of Padua, students cut open the secrets of the human body, echoing Herophilos and the lost physicians of Egypt. And in Venice, where the press never slept, books sailed to every port of Europe, carrying with them the breath of Alexandria. The dream of the new library. One night, as Lorenzo aged and the scrolls lived on without him, he walked alone on the docks of Venice. The moon painted the water silver, and in the lapping of the lagoon, he thought he heard the Mediterranean speaking to him again. You have carried the light forward. The sea remembers. Lorenzo imagined Alexandria rebuilt in thought, not of stone and wood, but in minds and pages. A library without walls, where every age would add its own shelves. And in a sense, that dream came true, for the world itself became Alexandria, its universities, presses, and archives, all descendants of that first city of light. 6. Epilogue. A circle complete. Centuries later, in a modern reading room of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a student runs her hand over a digital tablet, scrolling through texts once thought lost forever. The circle of history closes softly, with the hum of servers instead of the scratch of quills. But the spirit is the same. As long as we seek knowledge, a voice seems to echo from the sea and the stones. Alexandria lives. Chapter 12. The Eternal Voice of Alexandria. The Mediterranean lay still, its waters dark as glass beneath a silver moon. The harbour of Alexandria, now rebuilt and modern, whispered with the same ancient winds that once carried triremes, Roman galleys, and Arab dhows. Far below, in the green-blue silence of the seabed, the stones of the Pharos lighthouse still dreamed of the stars they once touched. Aye, the dream that never sleeps. Time is a patient river, and cities are its islands. Alexandria had risen, burned, drowned, and risen again. But in the dream of the world, it never closed its eyes. In the temples of the Ptolemies, priests had watched the stars, calling the city the mirror of heaven. In the Museion, philosophers had argued over the soul of man and the curve of the earth. And in the darkest nights after conquest, single candles burned in the hands of those who refused to forget. It was these candles, not the torches of armies, that truly carried Alexandria across the centuries. 2. The Keeper of All Time. In our story of the city, one figure returns again and again in different faces. The Keeper of Memory. In the first days, it was Callimachus, cataloguing hundreds of thousands of scrolls in the great library. In the last days, it was Niccolò's, whispering to empty halls and dust, carrying a city in his heart. And in the modern age, it is the archivist in the new Bibliotheca Alexandrina, scanning digital pages and smiling at the light of screens that hold 1,000,000 books. We are all librarians of the human story. The sea seems to whisper, and every memory saved is a city rebuilt. 3. The sea's final story. As the moon climbs, a modern research submersible drifts over the ruins of the Pharos. Its lights cut through the dark, revealing pillars, lion statues, and crumbled stairways that once climbed to the heavens. The pilot, a young woman, touches the glass of the viewport, and for a moment, she imagines the footsteps of ancient engineers, climbing those stairs to tend the fire that guided the world. Through her earpiece, a diver recites softly, "All cities fall, but some never leave the water." Above them, the waves lap against the modern Cornish, but the sea holds the library of its own, where coral and fish guard the memory of empire. 4. Across the ages. The story of Alexandria is no longer stone or papyrus. It is breath, thought, and dream. It flows through the scholar in Cairo, tracing a line of Greek poetry in a manuscript that once sailed with Lorenzo from the old harbor. The astronomer in Paris, building models of the cosmos that whisper Hipparchus' name across centuries. The child by the sea, staring at the horizon, dreaming of ships of gold and sails like wings. Alexandria is not a place, but a current, a pulse that moves through time itself. The lullaby of the city. As night deepens over the Mediterranean, the city lights shimmer, and a warm breeze moves like a hand through the palms. If you stand by the shore, eyes closed, you may hear the lullaby of Alexandria, the creak of papyrus rolls, the scratch of a philosopher's pen, the soft hum of the sea against the stones, and the distant call of a lighthouse keeper, saying, "The world is watching. Do not let the light go out." And in this song of water and memory, the city speaks to every dreamer. I am not gone. I live in every question, every journey, every book opened under the light of curiosity. I am Alexandria, and I am eternal. 6. The circle of light. Morning comes. The sun rises over the sea, turning the water gold. The modern city wakes. Fishermen hurling nets. Tourists photographing the Cape Bay citadel that sits where the Pharos once reigned. And deep in the new library, light spills across rows of glass and steel, where millions of books wait in silence, not afraid of fire or time, for their echoes now live in the cloud, in servers, in a world united by knowledge. The eternal circle is complete. Papyrus to parchment, parchment to print, print to light, and light back to the sea. Epilogue, the last whisper. As the sun sets, and the harbor glows amber, the Mediterranean makes one final promise to the city it has guarded for 2,300 years. I carried your ships. I buried your stones. I whispered your name to every shore. And I will carry you still, as long as men seek knowledge, as long as one dreamer listens to the sea. Alexandria breathes out, and the night takes her into its arms, not as a ruin, but as an idea that can never die. And somewhere, in the soft rustle of waves and pages, the city smiles. Chapter 13. The Library Among the Stars. The night sky above Alexandria was cloudless, its stars sharp and white as carved marble. A drone hummed silently over the Cornish, its cameras mapping the ancient stones below the sea, uploading their ghosts to a digital cloud. And in that cloud, Alexandria lived once more, not just in books, but in light, in electric breath carried through the unseen air. The future archivists. In the year 2176, a young historian named Amira sat in the orbital archive of the United Earth Federation, a glass-walled station turning above the Mediterranean Sea. Through her viewport, she could see the soft blue curve of the Earth, and somewhere along that shore, the city that had haunted every age, Alexandria. Amira worked in silence, her gloves moving through holographic scrolls, each one scanned from fragments salvaged across 23 centuries. The poetry of Sappho, once singed at the edges by Caesar's fires. Star maps by Hipparchus, his calculations now verified by orbital telescopes. The medical notes of Herophilos, guiding nanorobotic surgery in the 22nd century. The city never died. A mirror whispered. It only changed its shape. 2. The light beyond Earth. When humanity left Earth for the first interstellar voyage, they named the ship the Pharos. Its core AI contained the entire digital library of Alexandria, including modern science, art, and every fragment of human history. As the ship left the solar system, a golden plaque bore a single line: "We carry the fire of the first city of light." Through the void between stars, the ghost of Alexandria sailed again, just as Lorenzo's ship once crossed the Mediterranean, carrying scrolls through danger and darkness. 3. A city of light on distant soil. On Kepler 452c, centuries later, a colony dome of glass and steel rose under a pale orange sun. In its central plaza, engineers built a holographic library, a luminous spiral of books and scrolls, hovering in the air like constellations. The colonists gathered their children and said, "This is Alexandria. She was born on Earth, but she belongs to every world where thought can live." And in the artificial breeze, as light flickered against the dome, it was as if the city itself had crossed time and space to be reborn. 4. Time's infinite shore. Far from Earth, Alexandria now existed as a network of knowledge, a song that never ended. It lived in neural implants of students on Titan, quantum servers orbiting Mars, the whispered stories of parents to children in starships, AI tutors teaching lost languages to future generations. The city of memory had become the spine of humanity, just as it had been in the days of papyrus and ink. And somewhere, in the flow of electrons and photons, one could almost hear the sea again, lapping at the harbor stones of long-vanished Alexandria. The voice in the cosmos. One night, a mirror, now old and grey, watched a data beam leave the orbital archive, heading toward a colony near Alpha Centauri. She thought of Nicolo's, Lorenzo, and every anonymous scribe who had risked everything to keep a flame alive. A soft recorded voice played in her ear, a poem recovered from a fragment of Callimachus. "O traveller, who carries my words, let them not fall silent. Let the sea between stars remember me." And a mirror wept softly, because she realized that Alexandria was now the galaxy itself, a library without walls, without fear, without end. 6. Eternal return. At the edge of the universe, when humanity touches the unknown, they will find the city waiting. Not stone, not fire, but memory, voice, and dream. Alexandria will greet them in the stars, and the Mediterranean will shine in their hearts. An eternal shoreline that never drowns, never burns, never dies. Chapter 13. Shadows After the Fire. The smoke over Alexandria had thinned, but the air still carried the bitter scent of charred papyrus, where the great library once stood as a beacon of the world. Now blackened columns rose like broken teeth against the pale sky. The streets, once alive with philosophers, sailors, and traders, were hushed, save for the soft weeping of the wind through shattered windows. The ashes of knowledge. In a quiet courtyard, Nicholas, the last surviving librarian, knelt before a pile of ash that had once been hundreds of scrolls. He lifted a handful of grey dust, and it slipped through his fingers, blown by the Mediterranean breeze. He whispered to the empty air, "I can still see the words, like faint stars in my mind. But I am only one man. How long until even I forget?" Beside him, young apprentices scavenged through the ruins, searching for any fragment of parchment spared by the flames. A half-burnt medical treatise, a scrap of Homer, a charred map of the Nile Delta. Each fragment was treasure, and yet a ghost of what was lost. 2. The city holds its breath. The conquerors had left their garrison by the harbour, their flags and spears casting long shadows across the white stone quays. Fishermen returned cautiously, their boats rocking in the sullen tide. Merchants reopened stalls, selling figs and dates to soldiers, as if commerce might heal a wounded city. But Alexandria was not the same. The grand avenues of Canopic Street, once alive with music and voices in a dozen tongues, now echoed with hollow footsteps. The Pharos lighthouse still stood, its beacon sweeping across the harbour. But for the first time in memory, it felt like a watchtower over a conquered land, not a guardian of the world's wisdom. 3. Survivors of the Museion. In the ruins of the Museion, the last scholars met in secret, their robes dusty and faces drawn with sorrow. Among them was Theon, a mathematician whose works had been copied by students from Athens to India. He spoke softly to the circle. "We are the city now. If we remember, Alexandria breathes. If we forget, then the sea will take her name, and she will vanish like foam." A younger scribe, barely 20, clutched a rescued scroll to his chest and said, "I will not let her die." And in that dim hall, surrounded by broken statues of the Muses, they swore a quiet oath to carry the light of Alexandria in their minds, even if the city itself lay in ruin. 4. Whispers by the sea. As twilight fell, Nicholas walked to the shore, where waves kissed the sand, as they had for centuries of triumph and tragedy. He watched the horizon, where ships of the conquerors vanished into the distance, and he thought of all who had come before. Alexander the Great, dreaming of a city that would unite East and West. Cleopatra, watching Roman sails approach, and making her last, fatal choices. Caesar, whose fire had first tasted the library's heart. Now the city belonged to strangers. And yet, as Nicholas stood by the eternal sea, he felt a pulse beneath his feet, as if Alexandria herself still breathed. whispering through the stones and surf. A hidden legacy. Weeks later, under moonlight and secrecy, Nicholas and his young apprentices loaded a small fishing boat with bundles of scrolls and codices, the last whispers of the great library. They pushed into the dark water, keeping close to the shadow of the lighthouse, and rowed east, toward islands and safer harbors. If the city falls, the knowledge must live, Nicholas said, his voice trembling with both grief and hope. Behind them, Alexandria slept under the stars, a city of memory, ash, and stubborn endurance. And the Mediterranean, gentle and endless, carried them like it had carried every hope and ruin for 2,000 years. Chapter 14. The Journey of the Last Scrolls. The Mediterranean night was deep and silent, broken only by the gentle splash of oars. Nicholas, his hands raw from rowing, looked back one last time at Alexandria's dark outline. The Pharos lighthouse, its beacon turning slowly across the water, seemed now a lonely sentinel, guarding a city of ash and ghosts. In the small boat, bundled in oiled cloth, lay the last treasures of the library, a few hundred scrolls and codices, snatched from the inferno that devoured the Museion. Secrets of the scrolls. As they rowed east along the coast, young Talion, one of the apprentices, finally spoke. Master, what is inside these? Why risk everything for burnt paper? Nicholas paused, then lifted a scroll with careful hands. This one, he said softly, is by Eratosthenes, the man who measured the earth. The boy's eyes widened. Measured the whole earth? Nicholas nodded. Yes. He lived here, in Alexandria, 200 years before Christ. He compared the shadows in Scene and Alexandria, and with nothing but geometry and sunlight, he knew the earth was round. Knowledge like this is the true treasure of our city. In that moment, the boy understood why the scrolls mattered. 2. The perilous voyage. The fishing boat hugged the Egyptian coast, avoiding patrols and pirates. They stopped at small villages, trading fish and cloth for fresh water and bread. One stormy night, they sheltered under a rocky cliff, listening to the wind howl like a chorus of lost voices. This sea, said Nicholas, has carried the wisdom of the world, from Greece, Persia, India, and Egypt. But it also carries conquerors and fire. We must stay invisible, like the knowledge we guard. 3. The Island of Scribes. Weeks later, they reached Rhodes, an island renowned for its scholars and scribes. In a hidden monastery, they unrolled the surviving scrolls, and the monks wept to see them. Fragments of Euclid, the father of geometry, whose elements had taught the world to measure and build. Medical texts of Herophilos, who had studied the human body in Alexandria, describing nerves and the brain. Star charts from Hipparchus, mapping constellations with astonishing precision. One elder monk said, if the world knew what had been lost, it would mourn for 1,000 years. 4. Whispers of survival. From Rhodes, the knowledge spread quietly. Some scrolls reached Constantinople, others to scholars in Baghdad, where, centuries later, they would fool the great Arab golden age of science. Through trade and travel, The wisdom of Alexandria survived, fragmented but alive, hidden in monasteries, libraries, and memory. And so, though the city had fallen, its soul traveled the world, waiting for a new age to rise. Lessons from the fall. In his final days, Nicolaus wrote a single letter, addressed to no one and everyone. Let the fall of Alexandria be a lesson. Knowledge is the most fragile treasure, yet the only one that defies time. A city of stone can burn, but an idea carried in the mind can rebuild a world. Chapter 15. The Echo That Crossed the Ages. The sea lay calm that morning, a vast sheet of silver beneath a sky washed with rose. Nicolaus, now an old man, leaned on his carved walking staff at the edge of the Rhodian cliff, looking out toward the invisible coast of Egypt. It had been decades since he last set foot in Alexandria, and yet the city lived behind his eyelids, every column and every street as if etched in light. The wind carried salt and the faint cries of gulls, and he imagined it carried something else. Voices, distant but persistent. The scholars of the Museion, the scribes bent over papyrus, the echo of lectures and debates under the high ceilings of the great library. The city was gone, or at least, the city he had known was gone, yet its memory clung to him, demanding to be passed on. Eye keeper of the last scrolls. The years following the fire had been a blur of exile and secrecy. After the night of the Great Inferno, when flames rose from the royal quarter and smoke swallowed the stars, Nicolaus had led a small band of survivors north across the sea. Hidden in clay jars and oilcloth, they carried the last fragments of what had once been the greatest library on earth. Not even 1,000 scrolls, a mere spark of a sun that had illuminated the world. At first, they lived like wanderers, offering their skills as scribes to monasteries and scholars in Crete, Cyprus, and Rhodes, always trading work for secrecy. When Rhodian monks finally gave them sanctuary in a stone monastery on the cliffs, Nicolaus felt a seed of hope. In the monastery's lower chambers, far from the sea winds and sun, the scrolls slept. Some were blackened at the edges, others faded with age, but their words still spoke. The geometry of Euclid, precise as a soldier's march. The maps of Ptolemy, charting the known world and its imagined edges. The astronomy of Hipparchus, who had plotted the heavens before Christ was born. The medical treatises of Herophilos, who dared to explore the human body. And a single charred fragment, which Nicolaus believed came from Eratosthenes, the man who had measured the earth with nothing but shadows and thought. He would sit for hours, running his old fingers along the familiar ink, whispering to the young scribes. These are not merely scrolls. These are voices of the dead. Each line is a man's life, a city's memory, and the world's inheritance. 2. The slow drift of knowledge. Years became decades. News reached the monastery in fragments, carried by merchants and sailors. Alexandria had changed hands again and again. First Roman governors tightened their grip, turning the city into a grain port for the empire. Then the Christian emperors came, and the old temples closed, the Museion abandoned, its scholars exiled or forced to convert. Then, centuries later, Arab horsemen rode into Egypt, taking the city of the pharaohs for the caliphate. By then, the great library was only a story, a ghost that haunted travelers' tales. Some said it had burned entirely under Caesar, others blamed later emperors, and still others claimed monks themselves had destroyed a pagan knowledge. The truth, Nicolaus knew, was that Alexandria did not die in a single night, but in a long, slow unmaking, fire by fire, decree by decree, and neglect by neglect. Yet, knowledge had a strange way of surviving. A merchant from Anch spoke of scholars in Baghdad who translated Greek works into Arabic at the House of Wisdom. He described a city of domes and canals, where mathematicians and physicians debated like Alexandrians once had. They study the stars, the merchant said, and they use numbers like the Hindus. They whisper of men named Galen, Euclid, and Ptolemy. Nicolaus felt a fierce, quiet joy. Somehow, through war and exile, through sea and sand, the seeds of Alexandria had bloomed in another world. 3. Teaching the next generation. By the 50th year of his exile, Nicolaus could no longer walk the cliffs without aid. His hair was silver, his hands shook, but his mind burned with purpose. He summoned the youngest scribes in the monastery, boys and girls who had never seen Alexandria, who had never smelled the ink and papyrus of the great library, yet who would carry its soul forward. By lamplight, he taught them geometry from Euclid, medicine from Herophilos, the stars from Hipparchus. He spoke of the Pharos, the lighthouse that had guided the world, and of the Museion, where scholars from Greece, Egypt, India, and Babylon had once debated as equals. Remember this, he said. Knowledge is fragile. A city can burn, but an idea carried in the mind is beyond the reach of fire. He made them swear to copy the scrolls, to carry the words across the sea if danger ever came, to scatter knowledge like seeds in the wind. And the scribes swore, their voices trembling, their hearts lit with the weight of history. 4. The Chronicle of a Lost City. In his final decade, Nicolaus began a single, monumental work, a chronicle of Alexandria. It told of Alexander the Great, standing on the windswept shore, tracing the outline of a city in barley flour. The rise of the Ptolemies, who dreamed of gathering all the world's knowledge in one place. The construction of the great library and the Museion. Marble halls filled with scrolls from Greece, Egypt, Persia, India, and beyond. The Pharos lighthouse, 300 feet tall, its fire a star for sailors. One of the 7 wonders of the world. The long tragedy. Caesar's fire in 48 BCE, which destroyed the first great collection in the harbour. The riots and sieges of Aurelian, which scarred the royal quarter. The Christian decrees that closed pagan schools and drove out the last philosophers. And the slow erosion of memory, until the world forgot what had been lost. On the last page, he wrote, "The library is gone. The city I loved is gone. But its spirit walks the earth in every mind that seeks to know. Let no one forget our oath. Fire cannot kill an idea." The final day of the last librarian. One spring dawn. The sea was perfectly still, and the light fell soft on the monastery walls. Nicolaus asked the apprentices to carry him to the cliff. He looked out over the horizon, toward the invisible city of his birth, and breathed in the salt air. "I was born in a city of light," he whispered. "I die far from it, but the light has traveled farther than I ever could." With the scroll of his chronicle beside him, and the wind of the sea like a whisper of turning pages, the last librarian of Alexandria closed his eyes. 6. The legacy across the ages. The monks kept his oath. Scrolls travelled to Constantinople, then to Baghdad, where the House of Wisdom translated them into Arabic, preserving the mathematics, medicine, and astronomy of the ancients. From Baghdad, knowledge flowed to Toledo and Sicily, where Latin translators reintroduced it to medieval Europe. Centuries later, the Renaissance bloomed, fueled by the whispers of a city long turned to dust. Though Alexandria's stones fell, its soul crossed the world in ink and memory. proving the truth of Niccolò's final lesson. A city can fall, a library can burn, but an idea can live forever. Chapter 16. The River of Memory. The sun had risen high over the Aegean, spilling golden light across the stone monastery where the last whispers of Alexandria's library still slept. Though Niccolò's voice no longer filled its halls, his chronicle and the scattered scrolls had become the heartbeat of the place, a living monument to a city lost to time. The journey of the scrolls. In the years after Niccolò's passing, his apprentices fulfilled their oath. The sea lanes were dangerous, with pirates in the Aegean and empires rising and falling like tides, but the scrolls travelled, hidden in waxed chests and jars. A bundle of Euclid's Elements, smudged and fragile, found its way to Constantinople, carried by a Byzantine trader who thought them astrological charts. Medical treatises, once studied by Herophilos, were copied onto parchment and carried to Baghdad, joining the growing house of wisdom under Caliph Marmon. Fragments of Ptolemaic maps ended up in Damascus, where cartographers used them to redraw the world, linking China to the Mediterranean. The scrolls had become like seeds, tiny, fragile, yet carrying a forest inside, and the world was the wind that scattered them. In Baghdad, the House of Wisdom became a new Alexandria in spirit. Scholars translated Greek works into Arabic, then commented, expanded, and made them their own. Al-Khwarizmi studied mathematics and wrote the first great algebra text, building on Greek and Indian ideas. Hunayn ibn Shak translated Galen and Hippocrates, letting Alexandrian medicine shape Islamic hospitals. Astronomers refined Ptolemy, charting the stars above Samarra and Cairo. The chain of knowledge had not broken. It had bent, shifted, changed languages, and travelled oceans. 2. The Silent Renaissance. Centuries passed. Empires fell. Rivers of ink flowed. The Byzantine Empire guarded Constantinople like a fortress of memory, keeping manuscripts copied and recopied, while Europe slept in the early Middle Ages. When the Crusades and trade routes linked worlds again, a river of knowledge flowed back into the West. In Toledo, Spanish translators rendered Arabic texts into Latin, rediscovering Euclid, Aristotle, and Ptolemy. In Sicily, Norman kings welcomed Greek and Arab scholars, turning Palermo into a miniature Alexandria of the 12th century. In Paris and Oxford, young students puzzled over geometry and medicine, unknowingly studying Alexandrian echoes. By the 15th century, Renaissance Italy bloomed. Painters, engineers, and scientists awoke to an ancient voice, a voice that had sailed across 1,500 years of war and fire. Leonardo da Vinci studied proportions and anatomy, a distant heir of Herophilos. Copernicus read Ptolemy's Almagest, then dared to correct the master. Cartographers of the Age of Discovery sailed with maps rooted in Alexandrian geometry, stretching their fingers toward unknown oceans. In a quiet sense, Alexandria had never truly fallen. It had moved into the veins of civilization, whispering across time and tongues. 3. The Last Reflection of Niccolò's. One damp spring evening, in the 16th century, a young Venetian scholar named Lorenzo di Rossi stumbled upon a faded chronicle in a monastery on Rhodes. Its leather was cracked, its ink faded, and the title page read, "The Chronicle of Alexandria." Written by Niccolò's last librarian of the Museion. Lorenzo lit a lamp and began to read. With every line, he felt the city rise around him. The Pharos lighthouse blazing like a star. The marble halls of the library. The debates of philosophers and scientists. The final night of fire and exile. By dawn, Lorenzo wept, for he realized he held the voice of a man who had refused to let the light die. He copied the chronicle, then brought it to Venice, where humanists studied it and whispered of a city that had carried the world's memory. Though the great library's scrolls were scattered or lost, the story of its soul now walked among men again, ready to inspire the next generation. 4. The modern echo. Time marched on into modernity. Printing presses replaced scribes and lamplight. Empires rose, fell, and mapped the world in steel and steam. Yet, the dream of Alexandria never left humanity. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina, opened in 2002, stands on the shore where the ancient library once stood. Its glass disc-shaped roof like a rising sun over the Mediterranean, inscribed with letters from every known script. Museums and universities across the globe, from Oxford to Cairo, Harvard to Baghdad, hold fragments of that vanished world, scrolls and codices that once whispered in Alexandria's halls. Digital libraries now gather more knowledge than Ptolemy ever dreamed, sending it through light and fiber, where even fire cannot reach. Somewhere, perhaps, Nicolo's spirit smiles, knowing that the oath was kept, that the river of knowledge flows on, carrying voices from 2,000 years ago into a world of satellites and screens. A lesson for all ages. The fall of Alexandria is no longer just a tragedy. It is a warning, a lesson, and a promise. A warning that knowledge is fragile, and complacency can burn civilizations. A lesson that preservation and sharing are as vital as discovery itself. A promise that as long as one mind carries an idea, the light cannot die. On the windy shore of Egypt, where waves strike the stones of the modern city, a traveler can stand where the Pharos once rose, look to the horizon, and hear the echo of a city that refused to vanish. 6. Closing the circle. In the end, the fall of Alexandria is not the end of the story. Its books are ash, its marble halls rubble, its philosophers dust. And yet, every library today, every university, every online archive of human knowledge is a living child of that city. Alexandria did not die. It became the world. As long as one student opens a book, as long as one scholar seeks the stars, as long as humanity remembers, the light of the great library burns on, untouched by time, unbroken by fire.